This podcast is brought to you on Roku and Fire TV by Pod Nation Podcast TV. Find us on X, Facebook, Instagram, or wherever podcasts are broadcast. Download our app and never miss a show with video on demand, as well as exclusive content found only on Pod Nation TV. Live from Bangkok, Thailand, it's the Monster Island Film Vault, episode 97, Godzilla vs. Gigan, featuring Daniel DiManna. Hello, Kaiju Lovers, and welcome to the Monster Island Film Vault, a podcast seeking entertainment and enlightenment through tokusatsu. I am your host, Monster Island's traveling film curator, Nate Marchand. No, Jimmy, I will not be accepting the "my hard drive crashed" excuse anymore. Oh, retaliation from Goji-kun and Bro-Kong. Okay, I guess that makes sense. I told you to send them back to the island. Ultramind didn't show up quick enough. Well, what is he doing over there? Oh, hitting on a magical girl. Not my pseudo-sister, right? Oh, thank Godzilla. Anyway, yeah, sorry about that. If for those who might be wondering, if you've noticed that our schedule's gotten a little out of whack, and Jimmy hasn't been posting his blogs as much as you would expect. And for all of you MIFV Max members on Patreon, if you're wondering where's our bonus content, well, it's because we had some technology issues, which we're dealing with. Don't worry, we are dealing with those. Jimmy, is trying to fix the hard drives and figure out what chicanery our former mascots, well, I guess they're current mascots, but the mascots did. So, please be patient as we deal with that. But interestingly, given today's subject, and over-reliance on technology is a very appropriate thing to talk about. And I could think of no one better. In fact, to be honest, there was a gentleman who has been referenced on this show quite a bit, a Mr. David Callett. I actually went to extraordinary lengths to get him to come on today to talk about this movie, but it didn't quite work out, so I just had to settle for this dude over here, the author and creator of the Godzilla Novelization Project, and apparently, in his own words, a hard... Sure, jet it. I don't care. Daniel DiManna.
Wow. Okay, so how many times have I been on your little program here? How many different ways have you introduced me?
I've lost.
And how many of them measure up to the introduction I just got? The answer is none.
None.
That right there. I'm not going to say it was the best, but it was definitely the most fill in the blank. It was the most memorable, reputation damaging. I don't know. Maybe something.
I had a completely different one in mind, and then you practically walked in with this name tag that said that, listen, I'm like, I don't know where you've been that you had that name tag, or if you're just being funny.
You really didn't notice Jimmy making this for me and mailing it out?
So, really? You made this for him? Don't want to talk about it. Okay, whatever.
Naturally, you know what? You can plead the fifth, Jimbo. That's fine. That's fine.
Like, the fifth is his favorite amendment at this point.
It really is. But that being the case, Jimmy, and I am saying this into the microphone for posterity, you did mail me this, and it did come with a note that said, I dare you to wear this to the broadcast. $100 is waiting for you if you do. You didn't think I'd do it. You didn't think. Pony up, Mr. Jimbo. Wow. I want my 100 smackaroonies.
Wow.
Now, here's the thing. So here's the thing. I'm not going to repeat what is on my name tag. It was said earlier and jetted earlier. Anybody who knows me knows that I am a strictly family-friendly presence in the kaiju community. But $100 is $100. So I'm going to take it, and I'm going to take this tag off immediately and never wear it again. But I am going to get that $100.
Yeah. I will hold Jimmy to that. I'm sorry. You deserve that, dude.
I think so. I really.
You definitely deserve that. So how'd you get here? We're in Bangkok. We're still in Bangkok, I should say. We had to catch the critters from the lake and all of that. If you've seen that movie, and that was an experience. It wasn't a very exciting one, but it was an experience. But there were drones involved, and going into caves and whatnot. After Jimmy's little experience being in the sewers of Seoul, he just decided, you know what? Let the drones do the work for me today. I'm not going into the cave.
I don't blame him. So, okay. So here's the thing. I feel like I have been in this flip-flapping robot so much this year.
I'm amazed there's any of it left at this point.
I kind of am too. I kind of am too. There is still a robot to come back to, and I keep coming back to it. Not in any of the Koreas this time, or China, which is interesting.
But Hong Kong the first time.
Hong Kong, and to I feel like I've been everywhere. I've been everywhere. And I actually did get a chance to finally go home and see my family, give my godchildren a hug, and go to G-Fest.
I was going to say, I actually managed to get a little bit of vacation time, and I don't know, might have found a convenient Hollow Earth passageway to Chicago.
Wait a minute, you Hollow Earthed your way to Chicago?
I know things.
I guess you do. That's pretty impressive. Because
let's just say I'm friends with certain Eskimos, and he knows things.
Okay. Well, I'm not following up on that one with a 10-foot pole. So, a North Pole, maybe.
Oh,
give me the button.
There. Come on, Jimmy. Come on.
Jimmy.
There.
Thank you. Okay. I work hard for these things. So,
yeah.
Okay, I went to G-Fest.
Oh, wrong button. Likely story. Okay.
I don't believe a word out of your mouth, Jimmy. I just don't. I love you, Jimmy. But A, $100, B, I don't believe you. So this is relevant to how I got here. So when I went to G-Fest, which was incredibly busy, I did 7 panels. I was very, very tired. And one of the panels I actually did something kind of fun for. And you saw this, so you know where I'm going with this, Nate. I hand sculpted a replica of the King Caesar statue from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla.
I want one.
Brought it. And of course now X Plus just announced one. Of course they did.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, replica. They're going to make one, and it's gorgeous.
Pay friend to make one or buy from X Plus. How badly do you want another $100?
Listen, badly. I'll take it. I'm not even going to mince words here. So I brought this thing with me and brought it to the I was on the 50th anniversary Mechagodzilla panel with our friend Elijah Thomas and the awesome Matt Frank. And I brought it to just surprise people. I thought it'd be kind of a fun thing to work on this thing. And then throughout the weekend, I made a joke on the panel about, I got to protect this thing from gorilla aliens, be on the lookout for gorillas, which I thought was funny. And then I started noticing people following me throughout the hotel with this thing. Uh-oh. And I was like, this is kind of, a few people did stop me because they wanted photographs. And I thought that that's what this was. But it kept happening. And finally I was like, okay, I need to put this thing back in my room. And I hid it in the safe. And it's a good thing I did, because there was a point where I got back into my room and it looked for all the world like somebody had been in there. Some of my collectibles had been kind of moved around a little bit. And I thought, are they looking for the statue? I hope not. So I kept it in the safe. And then, I drove it home all safe and sound. And I'm like, okay, somebody like some ne'er-do-well at G-Fest wanted to steal my sculpture. And I noticed a couple of dark colored cars following me. Mm-hmm. Again, weird coincidence. And I that's what I thought. And I got home, and then I saw my sculpture of the Shisa statue sitting on my kitchen table, even though I brought it with me.
Oh, no.
So I don't know when it happened. I don't know how it happened. I don't know where it happened. But the one I brought to G-Fest was not my sculpture.
What?
I'm pretty sure it's the real deal,
Oh,
the real one. I think it's the real. Like,
no.
so I don't know how it happened. I don't know how it happened, but for the last few weeks after G-Fest, I've been noticing things. I've been noticing cars following me. I shook hands with a guy at a CVS and his hand was a little hairier than it should have been. I feel like I'm being followed. Yep, I feel like I'm being followed. So I actually took an Okinawan cruise to get here, and I did pay the people to divert me to Bangkok.
Okay.
And I'm going to catch a completely different ride because I took the Okinawan cruise specifically to go to the island to see if the statue had been removed.
That would be very good, especially since King Caesar, a lot of people don't know this, King Caesar is not a permanent resident on the island. He still spends most of his time on Okinawa, and what's the girl's name from the movie? I'm forgetting.
Nami.
Nami. I think like Nami's granddaughter is now in charge of the whole thing. And
yeah, I met her. She was there. She was at the temple when I came, and I asked her about it, and we chatted about it. Didn't take me long to figure out that, statue was missing. The statue was missing, and somehow I got my hands on it. Now, I don't currently have it, so I couldn't return it, but I was able to basically, I got it back, and I have it with me, and I'm going to return it to the island like before I head back to the United States. So I've got it with me, but I had to take a couple of weird cruises. I had to take a weird Okinawan cruise, and then I had to take a weird kind of bush plane ride from a shady guy. And now I'm here.
Okay.
So I'm here. I got here.
You have all of your internal organs and stuff, right?
I have all my internal, as near as I can tell.
Kidneys?
I did feel a little lighter when I woke up this morning.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you might want to have an X-ray or an examination.
Yeah,
you got to go find go find one of the legit doctors in Bangkok to do it. Though.
No. I think I'd just rather go back to Okinawa and let them do it.
Yeah.
I'll go to an Okinawan hospital. Yeah. I'll have Nami Jr. hook me up.
Nami the Third. Yeah.
Nami the Third. She lovely woman. Give me a tour of the. I actually got to go to the beach. The beach. Almost started singing. Didn't want to embarrass anyone. So
I have a feeling that, well, I shouldn't say that because you've done singing on podcasts before. King Caesar's not going to be rude enough to poke his head out of that cave and tell you, shut up.
Don't tempt me, man. I'll sing the King Caesar song.
I don't know. It'd be funny to he pokes, he peeks out of his little cave and just says, "Hey, Danny, you sing off key," and then just goes back into the game.
Please tell me you're not gonna do the second verse. Once was enough. Please, no. He sound like, I don't know why I made King Caesar sound like somebody who's been censored on like an investigation show. They're sitting in a blacked out background. It all started the day that the gorilla aliens came and stole my statue. That's what that sounds like.
I mean, King Caesar's seen things, man.
He has seen things.
Yeah. I'm glad that you're okay, especially since Kuronuma is inexplicably on the board.
I made that connection. I'm not going to point fingers because I know Big Brother is listening, but I don't know. I feel like ever since the Emir thing, weird things have been happening where it's like they're trying to frame me. I don't know. I mean,
you're not the only one.
No, it's going around. But that doesn't have a whole heck of a lot to do with what
funny enough, one of Kuronuma's fellow board members is relevant to this movie that we're talking about today because Kubota is also inexplicably on the board, but he's actually a cockroach, so I guess they can survive anything.
He's shaking off his wings and trekking across the lid.
Apparently, because today we are talking about Godzilla versus Gigan! I've been sitting on that joke for like days.
Ooh, if you listen carefully, you can hear my tinnitus flare up. Yeah, Gigan.
And Controller X is on the board last I checked, too. So,
Good Lord.
I'm trying to placate all of them at this point, I guess.
I guess.
But yes, Godzilla versus Gigan. Now, this is one I have to admit I have been looking forward to this one for a while because I've said that I've gone on record as saying this on panels and on other podcasts. This I still think is one of the most underestimated films in the entire franchise.
I agree. I feel like this is one that is, I'm not going to say like modern parlance, like that it's slept on. I'm not going to say that, but I feel like this is a poster child in the Godzilla franchise it is a picture perfect example of a film that offers far more than might initially meet the eye and does so in a film that is incredibly entertaining. It's not like you're saying, oh, well, this is a bad movie and it has an interesting backstory, or you're saying it's the movie's not great, but the history is interesting. No, this is a movie that has such a fascinating behind the scenes tale to tell, and the reasons that it exists and why it exists the way it does is just as good and entertaining as the movie itself.
It's a story of, I want to say, sheer perseverance. They had more. We'll get into it in more detail. I don't want to get into too much of it right now. But we had, it was made at an interesting moment in the history of the franchise. There were studio marching orders from Tanaka, and you had filmmakers who were trying to do the absolute best they could with limited resources. You had You had two screenwriters, two veteran screenwriters who were mandated to write scripts, and both of them writing scripts, and one of them getting picked over the other, and one guy being like, I don't know what to do because I'm out of ideas, but let me do something interesting with this, and not everyone's going to pick up on it. And, so much is in this. It is, again, one of the most underestimated films in the franchise, and I will fight anyone on that statement.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll fight them, but I will tie them to a chair and maybe make them feel bad. No, I won't do that.
Yeah.
But this is a movie I will, not aggressively, because I'm not into that, but like I will passionately and sincerely defend this film. Mm-hmm. I'm not gonna like strap somebody to a chair and say you have to like it, but it's one of those things where I would hope that even if this movie isn't your cup of tea, or you have issues with it, or you've never really clicked with it, that you at least give the backstory a chance to offer some context, and maybe it'll recontextualize the film. You might walk away with, it still might not be your favorite, but you might walk away with a new appreciation for why it exists, and maybe even a little gratitude that it does exist.
Mm-hmm. The thing that's fascinating about it, and this will be the last kind of preliminary statement that I'll make, and then I will transition to you regaling us with a plot synopsis, because you give the best plot synopses on this podcast. I may have to hire you. I may have to hire you as just my plot summarizer or something like that.
Synopsizer.
Synoptinator. Well, I'm untying the knot in my tongue right there. But it is such a fascinating conglomeration of a bunch of different things. On one hand, it's recycling ideas. On the other hand, it's got really unique ideas in it. It's, in terms of theme and story elements, it was made by studio mandate, but but there's real artistry put into it. But it also has stock footage, but it's got this, and we're bringing back Ghidorah, but you're getting a new monster. But in order to make the new monster, we have to recycle old suits, and they've looked better. There's just so much that goes.
That's our episode, everybody. Good night. Thank you. Good night. There you go.
Yeah. But anyway, let's not waste any more time. Danny, what happens in this movie?
All right, everybody, strap in. Here's what happens in Chikyu Kogeki Mere Gojira Tai Gigan, or Earth Destruction Directive. Great name.
Yeah, it's a shout out to Luke Giaconetti, who uses that as the title of his podcast. I love that title.
It's a great title for a great movie.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, by the way, the alternate English title is Godzilla on the Monster Island, which is mostly a lie.
yeah, it's like 97.3% a lie because there's very little of this movie is on Monster. Yeah, about a minute of footage. So we open on a scene of destruction, of monstrous murder and death. Just kidding. It's a manga because our lead character is a manga artist, and not just any manga artist. He's a bad manga artist. Well, he's not a bad manga artist, but he is a failing manga artist. He is in trouble. His girlfriend is a third-level black belt in karate and could easily punt him all the way from Osaka to Kyoto, but she doesn't because she loves him and she supports him. And because she loves him and supports him and wants him to have a thriving manga career, I think he's good. I think he deserves a chance, don't you? He gets sent off to a brand new, weirdly almost Western-y kind of style theme park being built in the suburbs of Tokyo, a little joint called World Children's Land. And World Children's Land is being presided over by cockroaches. Is that a spoiler? Just kidding. It definitely is a spoiler. Yeah, they're aliens, but humans don't know that yet. One of them is Kubota. He's kind of creepy. He never freaking blinks. Watch him. He doesn't blink. And then you got Fumio Sudo, who's 17 years old and an absolute math whiz and a master of mapping galaxies. Wonder what that could mean. And, well, they like peace. They like talking about peace. They want peace. They like peace. They are thriving. They are striving for peace. Why? Don't know. Oh, yeah, it's because they're cockroaches, but we'll get to that. Anyway, we find out that somebody who worked there is missing. We know this because his sister's looking for him, and Corncob Hippie is looking for him. And Corncob Hippie and sister team up with Manga Dude and Karate Girlfriend to unmask the alien menace and then discover that they're cockroaches. Oh, and the middle of the theme park is a Godzilla-shaped tower, which is called Godzilla Tower. Very creative. And then Godzilla and Anguirus happen. But before that, we find out that there are space monsters. Oh, yeah. There's Gigan. He's big. He's mostly flesh, somewhat metal. A little bit of a red visor. Doesn't shoot a laser. The poster's a lie. And there's also King Ghidorah because studio mandates. And then Godzilla shows up. And Anguirus. This is the movie that establishes Godzilla and Anguirus as buddies, by the way. So let's just ride with that. Big old tag team. Nakano blows everything up. Godzilla Island. Let me try that again. Godzilla Tower. Freudian slip. Tries to kill Godzilla. Doesn't. Then it dies. And then the cockroaches die. And then Gigan decides to he flees. He's done. Ghidorah's done. The Earth is saved, but are the cockroaches dead? Absolutely, yes, they are. Enter Godzilla March. Beautiful sunset. We fade to black, and one of the coolest Godzilla movies ever has ended.
And boy,
also corn.
Yes, corn. I'm from Indiana. I know all about it. Also, I've been described as a corny person. No. I won't take that back. Go ahead. Hit me with it.
Jimmy.
Yeah. Come on. Come at me, bro. Come at me. Anyway.
I think you did. Whew, I need a drink of water.
I will admit that ending is a little more bittersweet now. Doubly so.
There are layers to that ending. We will get there.
Yeah, we will. Yeah. We will get there. But my goodness, this was one of the earliest Godzilla films that I saw in my Godzilla journey because the 70s films were relatively easy. Most of them were relatively, well, about half of them were relatively easy to come by. Hedera, Terror, not quite as much, although I got lucky and found Hedera because you were on for that episode too. You're practically my co-host this season. My official co-host. You've been on so much. Anyway.
Do I smell $300?
No.
The paying gig?
Yeah, there you go. But all that to say, I saw this one relatively early on, and I had fun with it. Like a lot of people, I saw Megalon first, and then I discovered Gigan was in another movie, which I should have known because there were hints at it in the next movie. But, didn't quite pick up on that because I was an ignorant little fan at the time. So
Just kidding.
You've discovered my secret. You must
I have.
die. Anyway.
Yes, you were following me. You can't have the statue, bro.
What?
You were... Mark Chan was a gorilla the whole time.
Hashtag it.
I might. Don't tempt me. All right, anyway, go on.
Anyway, I'm just saying, like, it was one that I saw early on, and I enjoyed it, but it was when I started taking a more scholarly approach to this and actually being willing to hear fans talk about these movies in scholarly fashion, because I used to kind of dismiss it as just, fans trying to buck against the popular opinion and thinking that they're just speaking as fans. But then realizing that that's not entirely true, and I should be taking it more seriously, that it elevated this movie to, honestly, probably in my top 5.
Nice.
Godzilla films, because at least I'm pretty sure, if not top 5, for sure top 10, because I do think it's a grossly underestimated movie, even to this day. I mean, it's popular to reevaluate Hedorah and All Monsters Attack, and basically the rest, all the rest of the 70s. We've even Megalon, to a certain extent, has been allotted a certain amount of reevaluation, but not this one. Not that I've seen anyway.
It's coming. I think this one has enough people who genuinely love it that it doesn't fall into the same camp of, like an All Monsters Attack / Godzilla's Revenge, where it's not a 50-50 split. Like, for a long time, it was like, it felt at least like 85-15 in favor of hatred. And I don't think Megalon has ever really inspired hatred. It's just inspired apathy. I don't think there are a lot of fans that are like, oh, I can't, that movie can go die in a hole. I hate Godzilla versus Megalon. I don't see a lot of that. I see people who are like, it's not one of my favorites. But even then, it falls more into that split thing than something like Gigan does, because I think there are enough things about Gigan that people love, especially the monster himself. Great stuff, and the presence of King Ghidorah, which I'm going to touch on here in a minute when we get to the backstory, and then Anguirus. People love Anguirus, right? So there are a lot of things about the movie that elevate it to being a little bit more, beloved than in an All Monsters Attack reevaluation. So the reevaluation aspect of it hasn't really, I think, set into the extent that those have, because when somebody, still to this day, when somebody says, All Monsters Attack is actually pretty rad, you'll still get people going, oh, what? And not a lot of people are doing that with Gigan. Most people be like, Gigan, it's fine. But again, this isn't a movie that inspires a lot of like loathing. I just don't think it does, and everybody's opinions are going to vary on it, but I don't know. This is a movie that I would love to see a reevaluation, not necessarily in terms of its quality, but in terms of what it's trying to say, what the depth is, the interesting backstory, the thematics. I want people to reevaluate the thematic depth of the film.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that.
Because once you understand what was going on in Japan in the early 70s, this movie subtly becomes a lot more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And a little bit what was going on in the rest of the world at the time, but particularly in Japan. Which, do we want to talk about that first, or get into the production history of this? Because I don't normally get mired too much in production history for these movies, but this is one of the ones I will gladly make an exception, because there's a lot of interesting stuff here. It's not pivotal. That I don't care about the production history. I've gotten into it with other movies, but this one
this is part. It's part of the package.
It's part of the package. You have to know about this, because that was what did it for me, understanding the context. So
I say we set the scene with a little bit of what's going on in Japan, because in order to talk about how the film and why the film got made, you have to know the context of the culture.
Right. And one thing that should be noted, and this is an interesting, I don't want to say coincidence, but it's an interesting event. But one of the unique aspects of this movie is that the setting is largely a theme park. Well, what's the most famous theme park in the world? Disneyland, right? Well, that was the first one to open in California. Disney World, which is the one I'm familiar with because I have visited Disney World as a child growing up, that's the one in Florida. Guess when Disney World opens?
You tell the nice people.
October 1st, 1971, 5 months before this movie opened on March 12th, 1972 in Japan.
There you go. There
And
you go.
although this movie does predate Tokyo Disney.
Oh, by about 12 years. Tokyo Disney opened in 83. There was it was ultimately kind of inevitable because Japan has a very fascination with Disneyland and Disney World and theme parks in general. About half a decade and a pinch after Disneyland opened in California, there were talks to actually open another Disney park in Japan. And there was a Japanese entrepreneur who was a big fan of Disney, went to him. They actually talked, and there were initial plans to do this, and they ultimately fell through. But in the early 60s, this guy went off and basically made the theme park anyway. It was called Nara Dreamland. And Nara Dreamland is basically Disney. It has a main street and a big castle and a train. It was basically a Disney ripoff. I don't really want to call it that, but it was, for all intents and purposes, the guy just built a non-trademark Disneyland in Japan. And
sounds a little bit like something I saw recently. No comment.
No comment. But I know what he's talking about, everyone. And
the power trip might be coming back for an episode, surprisingly. Anyway.
Ooh, there you go. So that's too much of a detour to really spend a lot of time on, but Nara Dreamland ended up becoming kind of a big deal. And there was a kind of, not boom necessarily, but there were plenty of other theme parks that started popping up in Japan at the time, riding on the coattails of Disney. And then it kind of died out a little bit. And when Disney World finally became a thing, that was a big project that Walt Disney himself was working on before he died. It created another big boom and interest in theme parks around the world. But in Japan, it became a big thing. Nara Dreamland was I want to say it was bulldozed a handful of years ago, but it became famous a handful of years back for being an abandoned theme park that people would break into and film.
I know a little bit about abandoned theme parks.
Yeah, you kind of do, sir. That was spooky.
I told you that story. Yeah. That one was haunted. That was fun.
Yeah. I say all that to say that this is a wormhole that we're not going to go down here, but needless to say, there's a lot of fascinating history.
Right. If you want to learn more about the history, a brief history anyway, of theme parks, go listen to my episode on the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms from all the way back in season 1, because that's what I did.
Yes.
Yeah. So you have that. The other important thing, and like Nara Dreamland, theme parks, and this subject, these could be topics for an entire podcast.
Oh, yeah.
We're not going to get into it in detail like Danny said, but the other thing to keep in mind, and the way you see it in this film, is when our heroes are doing their investigation, they find out that the people who are funding this theme park are foreigners.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, they are from Switzerland, which is famously a neutral country whenever there's, say, I don't know, a world war breaking out in Europe. So it's a neutral country. This plays into, it plays into the, and I talked about it in the Monster Zero episode about the, the invasion theme in these movies and how it plays into the Japanese distrust of foreigners, which mildly insulting in this one because I don't necessarily like to think of Americans as cockroaches, but a more accurate way to view this, if you want to get all English majory about this. The other big thing that was happening in the early 70s in Japan was market penetration. U.S. corporations, foreign corporations, but mostly U.S. corporations like, say, McDonald's, were breaking into the Japanese market in the late 60s, early 70s. And like I said, since the Japanese traditionally have at least a little bit of a distrust of foreigners, you can imagine why that would be a little bit anxiety-inducing, particularly if you're a native Japanese business and now suddenly you don't just have to compete with your fellow Japanese businesses, you have to compete with the foreigners. And they're huge corporations. They're not just small-time things. No, these are massive corporations that are breaking in here. So you could say that corporations are like cockroaches. They get everywhere and you can't kill them. That was very Fozzie Bear now that I think about it.
There you go. Very fuzzy.
Yeah.
It is. And that alone is a fascinating context for this. The idea that like this foreign, from the Japanese perspective, of course, this foreign, entity, this business, this corporation, the World Children's Land people move into the country from a neutral space. And it's like, okay, well, we can't track them. We have no idea where the money's coming from or where it's going. That's a little suspicious. And then you get to the rather fascinating, and this is something that would have gone over the heads of people watching the Godzilla on Monster Island version in 1977, all the home video versions on VHS and television.
Until Criterion, because Criterion, as much as we have criticized that Criterion set, there's a few gems of favors that Criterion has done for us in that set, and this movie is one of those.
It really is. Even excluding the fact that Criterion was the first to debut the actual Japanese print complete with word bubbles, which we'll get to. My interesting tidbit here is that, and because you can go all the way back to the Sony DVD, the 50th anniversary DVD for this, the debut of the Japanese language version, you don't get this with the dub, but Kubota sprinkles English into his sentences. You hear him say no several times. Very good, he says. So
tape
there,
which comes out as tape is one of those loan words in Japanese, because when you hear them say it, they say it with a Japanese accent. So say teipu.
There's that U sound at the end that often accompanies hard consonant sounds in Japanese, and so you have teipu and then no des, but it's very clearly English, and it's sprinkled in at seemingly random places. But if you pay attention, those uses of English are at very punchy moments in the script. Right? Very good. Hard yes, hard no. And then important words like tape that are going to stick out. And it makes Kubota, our main villain in the story, have this very kind of, there's an uneasy feeling about him just from that alone, because it's not like a huge red flag that he's evil or anything necessarily, but it is kind of an exotic. It's something that sticks out. It's like those old clothing ads from the 50s where they had the guy wearing the eye patch for no reason. The clothes were fine. The guy was normal, but people paid attention because it was a non sequitur. Why is he wearing an eye patch? It makes you pay attention. It's good marketing. This guy speaking weird random English makes you go, what is his deal? And so it kind of at the time would have played into some of the unease and distrust that was going on in terms of people outside, because up until the mid 60s, Japan had a very insular, they were very insular in terms of their pop culture. The exact word is escaping me at the moment. Jimmy, you'll have to pull this up for your blog, but it was the idea that almost all of the art and commerce was created internally by and for the Japanese. And then that started to kind of fall apart in the 60s, and they started especially in television, they started importing American television shows.
And they started exporting their own.
They started exporting their own. Exactly. So they were opening up a little bit, and as their culture started to kind of mingle with ours and others.
I think the big turning point for that was the 64 Olympics.
The 64 Olympics was the moment that the Japanese really opened up and said, look at how amazing our country is. Look at how big we've gotten. We are not this backwater country of, people picking rice, which was such an inaccurate, horrific, cliche at the time. I've
seen dino saucers. I know.
Oh, God. Horrible, but like as horrific and as horrifically insensitive as that is, like that was the idea. They were like outside of Japan, nobody had any idea by the mid 60s that the economic miracle was in full swing, and that the Japanese were like doing, hey, it's a real country with people that are doing things with technology like everywhere. Like, who knew? So the Olympics was really part of shattering that very insensitive outlook on Japan, and that trickled all the way up into the 1970s as the economy started to invite foreign influence in a little bit, And because that was a big part of the economic miracle, was having things exported, things imported. Oil from the Middle East was a big part of that. That becomes a problem in 1973 with the oil crisis and like all of this stuff. And by the 70s, a lot of the side effects were starting to pop up. Obviously, the pollution that's touched upon in
go listen to the Hedera episode. You want to know we're up with the oil crisis? Go listen to the Kong 76 episode.
Yes.
Shameless self-promotion.
Shameless self-promotion.
Because I have researched so much stuff that is relevant to this particular, to these movies, particularly this era. There's a lot of crazy things.
There's so much, and it's so intrinsically tied to what Japan was going through, and this isn't even all of it. It's fast, too much to cover here. But there's a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Which is why, and I understand the sentiment. It was a big reason, because the reason I wanted to have Mr. Callett on this episode, why I worked really hard to try to get a hold of him. And, I'm sad that he's not here with us. He just said, I don't have the bandwidth, and I understand. But reading his book was one of the first steps that I took into gaining a greater appreciation for this movie. And while I don't exactly agree with the statement, I get what he means by it, which he said that you could describe this movie, now that we've laid out some of the context, you could describe this movie the same way one of our villains describes our manga artist hero, which is, he is stupid, but cunning.
Stupid but cunning.
There's different translations for that, depending on, that's the dub line, but different editions have subtitled it differently. Criterion has it as foolish yet cunning, which I think is more accurate to the context, but
that might be a little bit more of a gentle way to say it. That, maybe there's a stream that runs through the middle of this kind of silly, foolish film, if you want to call it that. I don't know if I would, but this is not a perfect piece of art by any stretch of the imagination, but it is an entertaining and a fascinating one.
Yeah, for sure. And now I think would be a good time to move into what was going on, the production background. Again, we're not going to get mired in this too much, because you could do an entire podcast episode on the making of this movie.
This is a series.
yeah, because I do want to focus on talking about the movie itself, but the making of is so fascinating. So the first thing that we have to talk about is Hedera happened.
Hedera sure did happen.
Hedera happened. You, again, go listen to our episode on it to get the full details. But to put it succinctly, that came out and Tanaka's like,
Now his reaction has been horrifically overblown,
which
but it is not. Yeah. It is, but the fact of the matter is, the man was not pleased. And another wrinkle to that is the fact that Hedera didn't lose money or anything, but it came out in 1971, and that same year. And this is an aspect that I don't think is talked about nearly enough. We're at the height of the Champion Festival era right now of Godzilla films, where classic films would be sliced and diced into shorter material. They'd be paired with cartoons and like episodes of Ultraman and stuff like that, and they'd be thrown into the theaters for the kiddos during spring and summer. And in 1971, same year Hedera came out, there was a movie put into theaters called Monster War: King Ghidorah Against Godzilla. Monster Zero. It was the re-edited version of Monster Zero, and it made a bank. People flocked to go see this classic movie that it was cut to ribbons, but it was shorter. But the King Ghidorah versus Godzilla, essentially, version of that ended up being a success. And then shortly after that, a shortened version of Greatest Battle on Earth, aka Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, was put into theaters. What's the common denominator between those two movies?
Ghidorah.
King Ghidorah. So when you're Tomoyuki Tanaka and your last weird art house, avant-garde, crazy fish head, dancing skeleton, melting people, baby slime movie didn't quite work because you weren't watching.
That needs to be on the back of the next Blu-ray release, right there.
Yeah. when Tanaka the cat is away, Bono the mouse will play, and that happens. What are you gonna do? Like, the idea at that point, I would think, is pretty clear if you're Tomoyuki Tanaka, but to say that it was clear is not the same as saying it was possible, right? Mm-hmm. Because in a lot of ways, Tanaka's idea, which was to eschew all of the crazy Bono-isms and even a lot of the 70s-isms and just go full golden age with the next Godzilla film, right?
Go back to normal.
Yes, basically, yeah. Like, we're going back to a sense of normalcy. We want to recapture the mid-60s height of what Honda was doing and Tsuburaya, God rest his soul at this point, was doing. We want a movie that feels like a Honda film with effects that feel like they came out of the Tsuburaya era. We want big bombastic Ifukube music. We want the classic monsters. Oh, and we got to get King Ghidorah back because people still love him. In fact, his name should be in the title.
Yeah,
like, that would be a really great idea.
And Jun Fukuda's like, sure, I can do that. And then Tanaka said, here's $5 and some pocket lint.
Basically, yeah, it's like you have no time. Because again,
and you have 10 minutes to do it. So
you have 10 minutes, and 9 minutes 58 seconds. We're counting down. So that's why I say this is impossible, right? Because you can say, if you're Tomoyuki Tanaka, yeah, let's make a movie like the 60s, but the landscape of not just Toho, but the Japanese cinema landscape in general was night and day different than it was just less than 10 years earlier.
The film crash happened in 1970, and like so much had changed. Tsuburaya had died, and it was, television was completely taking over. They, like the entire studio system was just done with. That's why the 70s films have very few of the classic actors coming back, and it's mostly new actors, cheaper actors. Cheaper actors coming in. Like you said, the entire landscape. I think the way you had put it, and I think because we should reference this, the first panel we ever did together at G-Fest was one on, and if you want to see the video of it, it's on I will link to it. It's on the MIFV YouTube channel. We did a presentation on Sekizawa and Kimura. Standing room only there. We spent a lot of time talking about this movie. We highlighted it. We'll explain why in a moment. And, that was one of the things that we brought up in there was just how completely different the landscape was. And the point I was trying to get to was that I think you had one of the most interesting descriptions of both this and the following film, which was that Godzilla vs. Gigan was a product of circumstances. I'm probably paraphrasing slightly. Whereas Megalon was a victim of circumstances.
That's going to go in. I'm going to immortalize that at some point because I actually was in a rare moment for me. I was rather proud of that because not to disparage Megalon, but the same economic, cultural, industrial issues that were basically rallied against and in a lot of ways either embraced creatively or overcome to make Gigan ended up being a detriment to Megalon's production.
Basically Megalon was what Gigan could have ended up as. It
could have ended up, but they put their effort into that one, and even with the mandates, because make no mistake, Gigan was a studio mandated film. They said, listen, the last movie didn't do horrifically at the box office, but it could do better if we bring it back to the movies that made bank. Because remember, the 60s Godzilla films also made bank. They put butts in seats, and at this point, again, the entire landscape is different. Honda was off doing television. He's not coming back. Thank God they had Jun Fukuda. He's amazing. Ifukube, although he was tangentially involved with this film, was off doing other things. Tsuburaya, of course, had passed, and the actors, when the studio system fell apart, the actors, a lot of them were released from contract, and they could go do whatever the heck they wanted. So the repertory players were all gone.
Yeah. Honestly, I think probably the most high-profile actor in here is the girlfriend.
Yes, and
Yuriko Hashimi, correct?
Yuriko Hashimi, who is beloved to this day, almost like worship revered as Ann Yuri on Ultra 7.
From Ultra 7. Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons she landed this role.
I was thinking when you were doing the synopsis, I'm like, she gave up Dan Moriboshi for this guy? You could be mean about it.
Ouch.
I could. Let's be honest. She might have thrown that at Gengo at some point or another. It's just like, I could have had Ultra 7.
I could have had Ultra 7. I could have been with him in the land of light. I don't know why she's British. But it was
I don't know why she's British. But because I do want to give shout outs to these actors. But
we absolutely do.
So the rest of our cast. So before we get too far into this, but we have Hiroshi Ishikawa as Gengo. He's our main hero. We have Tomoko Umeda.
Yeah.
And then we have Minoru Takashima as Corncob Hippie.
Yeah, Shosaku the Corncob Man,
Yep.
who is actually described in some press material as a vagabond instead of a hippie.
Oh.
Interesting in Japanese.
But,
interestingly,
yeah, but to us,
I've also seen some descriptions of him in Japanese translate as Ronin. Believe it or not, isn't that weird?
Interesting. That is interesting.
Corncob Ronin has a ring to it, though, doesn't it?
I need that to exist now.
Corncob Vagabond and Corncob Ronin.
Corncob Ronin.
Coming to Tokyo TV this fall.
That'd be a hilarious Kurosawa parody right there. And then Tachiaki Nishizawa as Kubota, who I found out through my research was also a regular on Toei Spider-Man.
Yes, he is on Spider-Man. Gives a really creepy performance in this. I think it's 50% he doesn't blink and 50% mustache.
Yeah.
The creepy mustache.
I think mustache.
The mustache.
The mustache. And then finally, and there's a few other bit players that we could go into, but I'll mention the suit actors too. But Kunio Mirai rounds out our cast, and then our suit actors are Haruo Nakajima in his final performance as Godzilla, which is why the ending is a little bittersweet. And to make it even more bittersweet, Kenpachiro Satsuma returns not as Hedorah, but as Gigan. This was his second major suit acting experience, as far as I know. He comes back in the next film as well. And then, because these guys don't get enough love, the suit actors in general don't get enough love, unless your name is Nakajima or Satsuma. Yes. But Koetsu Omiya as Anguirus, and finally, Kenta Ina, I hope I said that correctly, as King Ghidorah. Wanted to make sure I mentioned though.
Absolutely. Interesting thing about Nakajima. So pop quiz, when did he retire from the role of Godzilla?
72. Well, no. He did it one more time after this for a photo shoot.
You would be wrong on both counts.
Really?
Because he quit after Hedorah.
Oh yeah, but he was convinced to come back by Nakano.
He was working at a freaking bowling alley after Hedorah, and Nakano and Fukuda tracked him down and said,
Nakano came a knocking.
Nakano, Jimmy, you're my hero for the wet trombone. So the thing about Nakajima is that he was in his 40s at this point, and before the death of Tsuburaya, he said that he felt like he could do it until he was 50 plus years old. Like he wanted to keep going, but the death of Tsuburaya really took the wind out of his sails, and he felt like he couldn't really go on without the old man, as they all called him colloquially, the old man, Oyaji-san. And he did Hedorah, and it just something didn't quite click right. You know what I mean? So he left the role behind, and then Nakano came to him and said, I literally cannot do this without you. And that's not the first time he'd heard that. Tsuburaya used to tell him that. So he came back, he did one more movie, and really, according to a lot of accounts, kind of his perception of it shifted a little bit. In later years, he said he would have loved to come back for Megalon, but did not get the call. And so he moved on and did some other things. And again, he did put the suit on years later one more time, did a few other fun things here or there. But yes, this was the film where his retirement from the role was permanent. There is a surely unintentional, but definitely extant amount of bittersweetness to that last shot of him wading off into the sunset.
Yeah.
There's something very powerful about that.
Yeah, for sure. And, we'll talk about Satsuma a little bit as well. We have to at this point.
Oh, yes.
Which just adds to the bittersweetness of it. I should note that I mentioned this was released March 12th. That was at the Champion Film Festival. And in case you were wondering what it played with.
Oh, yeah. It played with a few things.
It was the main feature, and it played with a few episodes of Mirror Man, which was a Tsuburaya-produced Henshin Hero show. It's an interesting little show. It just turns into Ultraman halfway through because apparently the not the studio, the network got complaints, but it also played with a few episodes of Return of Ultraman. They did a compilation movie called Jiro Rides a Monster.
Yes.
And then something called Pinocchio the Series. No idea what that is. Hutch the Honeybee. Hold Me Mama. Oh, my.
Hold Me Mama Gone?
We'll get to that. Because there's Return of Ultraman connections with that.
There are a few interesting things with that.
Yeah, we got to talk about Mamagon because that always baffled me a little bit. And then something called The Genius Bakaban. Was this made by my pseudo sister? She calls me that all the time. And then something called Night Duty is... Oh, no, that's a subtitle for the Genius Bakuman. Night Duty is scary.
You said duty.
Ooh, and you're fine. Anyway.
I am. It's true.
Yeah, but we all are around here. Let's be
honest.
Well,
a little bit.
We're all children at heart.
Monster Island Daycare. That's what the name of your podcast is.
No, there is a Monster Island Daycare because now there's a book series about it.
That's true. Well, it's
not daycare. It's summer camp. It's not quite the same thing.
Yeah, but
it's quite the same thing.
Almost.
So anyway, all of that to say, so we got all of our players in place. We've got our director and all of that, mandates from the producer. We got to have a screenplay. So Tanaka calls the two heavy hitters, the big guys, Shinichi Sekizawa and Takashi Kimura or Kaoru Mabuchi. When you and I did our panel, we thought that Mabuchi was the pseudonym. There's been some more information that's come forward thanks to a couple of our friends that it seems like it might be the way around. You and I are still trying to figure out what that, how to process that because you and I are still not entirely sure what to think of that.
I'm entirely convinced at this point. I think that all the evidence clearly illustrates that Mabuchi was his real name and Kimura was his pen name.
The fact that he switched it even more baffling. I think because I don't think it can be argued that after the mid 60s that it was just work for hire. He was no longer invested in it. Sekizawa was always invested. Even when it was work, he was invested in what he was doing. He was always having fun. Even at this point, he was still having fun. Even though he's saying, I'm running out of ideas, but I'm still having fun because that's how Sekizawa is. But what makes this fascinating, and regardless of the whole thing with the names and what that might potentially mean, one thing that can't be denied is that this is technically, contrary to what the credits will tell you, a rare instance of them collaborating.
In a very weird way, yes. Basically, Tanaka, and I'm compounding this for the sake of telling the story. This is not exactly what happened.
I mean, I do have a few notes here if you need any help. Okay.
It gets the point across. Basically, Tanaka put the two guys in a room and said, here's what's going to happen. We're going to make a new Godzilla movie. It's got to be evocative of the height of the 60s. It has to have King Ghidorah and throw in some other monsters and a couple of other stipulations here and there, but it basically had to be done on the cheap. Make something that can be shot that's not going to put us into, bankruptcy. Something that Toho Eizo, because that's the other thing is this is the technical debut of Toho Eizo. They did not fully make the movie, but they provided production material, because the other aspect of this that's crazy is that Toho at this point had disbanded their special effects crew. There was no concentrated special effects department at Toho Studios anymore. And so they eventually ended up founding Toho Eizo, and that they were fully on board by the time Megalon came out. But in this one, they were still kind of getting their footing, and they ended up doing this will blow your mind. Here's a connection. A handful, it wouldn't be a handful. It'd be about 17, 18 years later, Toho Eizo, over the next decade plus, would start to do production artwork and pre-visualization work for theme parks.
Oh,
yes, theme parks. And in 1990, they collaborated on designing a theme park called Sanrio Puroland, which is the place where the Monster Planet of Godzilla ride opened in the mid-90s.
Oh no. I'm just waiting for Kubota to suggest rebuilding the Godzilla Tower on that Monster Island.
Just wait. I'm surprised there isn't one.
I'm surprised there isn't either, because the sad thing is, despite its dubious reputation, people would go. So they would go see it. But there were competing drafts, dueling drafts, we'll call that. You had Kimura / Mabuchi working on Godzilla versus the Space Monsters, and Sekizawa writing one called Return of King Ghidorah.
Yes. King Ghidorah no Gyakushu, King Ghidorah's counterattack. A great other use of the no Gyakushu naming trope in monster movies. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
So Nakano was also given a say in the scripts. This makes sense because he's going to be like, yeah, I can film that. No, I can't film that. And or I could film that. I just need more money. And yeah, stuff like that. Interesting. Shout out to John LeMay, who made me aware of this thanks to his wonderful books. His Unmade series is a treasure trove of information.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
But interestingly, Megalon, in air quotes, appears in this. There's no in one of his books, he said there's no description, but then he mentions in another one of his books, John does, that there is some verbiage that indicates that this version of quote-unquote Megalon has an eye at the end of an antenna that can fire a ray. And also apparently that it's a little bit similar to Hedorah and has a quote-unquote pinball attack.
That's one way of putting it.
Yeah. Now, I can tell you that the characters, I think in the Sekizawa draft, the characters are different but pretty similar to what we get in the final movie. The characters are closer to Sekizawa's draft than Mabuchi's. Mabuchi had a completely different set of characters.
Yeah, and you can really feel that in the film because these are Sekizawa protagonists through and through. Oh,
good Lord. Like, it's got... I think you and I, during our panel, basically said our conclusion was that the final film is Sekizawa characters with a Kimura plot.
It has a lot of the Kimura dourness that you might expect from some of his earlier pictures. It's kind of got a little Destroy All Monsters in it. I think clearly this is leaning very heavily on Monster Zero in a lot of ways, but there's also quite a bit of there's a bit of the kind of alien nihilist streak from Destroy All Monsters that pops up in there. And of course, this is not related to the script at all, but the cockroaches are using Keylak ray guns. This reused props, and then the gorillas use them in a couple movies. So they just reuse the guns.
Either that or the Keylaks were just before they tried to invade in 1999, or I should say the Disco Space Nuns. They were maybe they were arms dealers. Who knows? I mean,
maybe they were arms dealers, or maybe the cockroaches were the arms dealers, and the Keylaks bought from the roaches, or it was the gorillas, or
who knows. But anyway, moving on.
Whatever.
So in the previous draft, it was the World Children's Land. It was called Science Land, and it was more of a research facility than it was a theme park.
And there was a Godzilla Tower, humans built it. No aliens built it this time in that draft.
And in the Kimura draft, I'm sorry if I'm switching between Kimura and Mabuchi all the time. Just, they're the same guy, just so you know.
Yeah, same person.
But the characters were an airline pilot and a couple of stewardesses because they witnessed strange phenomenon while on a flight. And spoiler warning, one of the stewardesses turns out to be mind controlled by the aliens. Well, the villain, I should say.
Spoiler alert for a movie that never got made.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. And that draft also had a Daimajin in it, basically.
Yes. What is it? Majin Tool.
Other than that, Megalon, Monster Cast was the same.
Yeah, but which is a little inexplicable, Majin Tool, because he very much Daimajin once you get closer to the end of the movie. But here's the thing. This is the part that fascinates me so much. I know you were involved in a podcast project that adapted quote unquote unmade Godzilla movies. This is one that if I had the time and bandwidth, I would totally do this.
Yes.
The villain from the Kimura script is fascinating. His name is Miko. And what we don't know until the end of the movie, so spoilers for another unmade movie, he's literally an alien brain in a jar.
He's a brain in a jar.
And his method of taking over the world,
of course,
is propaganda.
Well, that doesn't sound like Kimura wrote it at all.
He runs a TV station, and he would interrupt broadcasts and put out propaganda. He's trying to take over the world with propaganda. This is like Cold War Red Scare American sci-fi movie stuff here.
It's so Kimura. It's so
it is
fascinating.
Deliciously Kimura.
It is.
Yeah. And then we mentioned Majin Tool, a living statue, probably inspired by Daimajin. He beats all the space monsters at the end, and Godzilla just shows up to kill Miko. Well, Godzilla gets his butt kicked. Majin Tool comes in true Daimajin fashion, just owns all of them, and Godzilla's like, thanks? Where's the brain?
Where's the brain? Starman sent me here.
I was going to say, let me kill the brain and take all the credit.
It's wild.
Also, Miko has an android minion that, depending on, from what I was reading, and because I got this from a couple of John's books, it sounds like he actually, not only is the android a minion, he also occupies the android body for a while so he can move around. And I'm thinking, M11, anyone?
Listen, I mean, if you look, the Godzilla franchise is right with history of people making movies later, pulling from unmade drafts. I mean, Shakura was basically invented in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it, he dates back to a giant tick that would have been in the Bride of Godzilla script from the 50s. There's a question mark in the title.
Yeah.
I'm leaning into it. But like that idea is from the 50s. It would have been the first Godzilla sequel.
Yeah.
And they pulled from it all those years later through a series of unusual events we won't get into. But those ideas come back, and it makes you wonder, did they, like Cyborg, maybe, I don't know. Maybe that draft was floating around.
I'm just saying, I want to flesh this out into a full-fledged story because it sounds so cool.
Listen, one of these days, like, I've got enough on my plate at the Godzilla Novelization Project actually writing out the movies themselves, but I have it in the back of my head that one of these days, if I'm still freaking alive by the time I get there, I want to adapt the unmade films, the unmade scripts into full novels.
Actually,
I would love to do that.
Your novelization of Gigan is one of my favorites, actually.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I've made a lot of progress on that one.
That's another reason I wanted to have you on. So, so that's a lot of that is from Kimura's draft. Sekizawa's first draft actually had more monsters. It would have had Rodan and Varan.
Yes. And baby Mothra.
And Mothra. And apparently they would have used Rodan if the suit wasn't in shambles. And
the suit was and
they just said no to Varan because they're like, there isn't a suit, dude.
Yeah, the suit from the 50s at this point was non-existent because it disintegrated, and the version seen in Destroy All Monsters was literally a puppet on a stick, man. It was the flying version from the 50s that hadn't deteriorated. You couldn't really, that's the reason it's not in Destroy All Monsters that much. It was a stick puppet.
Yeah.
It was just dangling from wires. There was no person in it. It was tiny. So there was no real way that they could have done that without putting the budget in to basically just making another Varan suit.
Which was not an option because they barely had money to make Gigan.
And that's the only one that they made for this film. The movie ends up using poor Anguirus, who at this point was the same age as Godzilla. He was 4 years old, and both of them were falling apart. King Ghidorah was falling apart. They had to resculpt his head.
I was going to say, at least they refurbished King Ghidorah.
They refurbished King Ghidorah. They had the budget to refurbish King Ghidorah and build Gigan completely. Nobuyuki Yasumaru was the mastermind suit maker, and he was responsible for making King Ghidorah not look like garbage and making Gigan look as cool as he was.
Unfortunately, Ghidorah's, I think Ghidorah
lethargic.
Ghidorah, all three of them needed to have their morning coffee. I'm just
the King Ghidorah in this movie is a little sleepy. He is not as, and it's so funny because a lot of King Ghidorah in this movie is stock footage, and that's the Tsuburaya era where he's flailing his necks all over the place and he's super frenetic, and then you have this very tired, barely moving Ghidorah who just kind of twitches his necks around.
Yeah.
The footage doesn't go that well together.
They did not have the puppeteers, the right number of puppeteers in order to do all of that. That was what it boiled down to from what I've read. It was a little bit the condition of the suit, but it was largely they just didn't have enough people to operate him.
And to the credit of Yasumaru-san, that Ghidorah did hold up because a year after this, he fought Zone Fighter. And Zone Fighter was not careful with that costume.
No,
Zone
he
Fighter
wasn't.
broke that costume, man.
Yeah.
He wasn't nice to Gigan either, but that's another story.
Well, he murdered
He killed Gigan.
from
He literally
7
murdered
ways
him.
from Sunday. But
Yeah.
but so that was why Ghidorah is so lethargic. I think the number I read was that they would have needed 22 people to fully operate Ghidorah, and they did not have that many available.
No, Toho Eizo was not up to snuff to do that.
Yeah.
And if they think about it, if they had done that and they'd had a Varan flying around and they'd had a Rodan flying around and there was another monster, Mogu. And if Mogu had been there, because there's concept art of Mogu that survives, and he's a dragon.
Oh, he was a dragon. I was always like,
he's basically a dragon. Yeah.
Okay. Like the part of me kind of wants to take like both of these scripts and kind of meld them into a weird kind of whole. Like it would be mostly the Kimura version, but I would love to sneak in things like Mogu and some of the other returning monsters into it somehow. But
it would have been like another Destroy All Monsters. With
a handful of new monsters. Mogu versus Majin Tool. Who are these guys? Anyway,
who are these guys?
That would have been epic though. Like a pseudo Daimajin fighting a dragon.
Yes,
sign
please.
Me up.
I'm in. Where do I stop drilling? You've hit oil. Where do I go?
Yeah. But John, and I think because it's a little strange that Sekizawa wanted to include Varan. It's not like people were clamoring for Varan necessarily. Well, John's theory, and I like this, is that Sekizawa had a soft spot for the guy because that was the first script he wrote for Toho.
I fully buy that. I mean, I'm not going to say that that's 100% fact because there's no proof of that, but I really like the symmetry of that idea. It's sweet. It's genuinely a sweet idea. I've always thought that was probably a reason. Now, Sekizawa had that was his big break for Toho. He'd done Fearful Attack of the Flying Saucers before that, not for Toho, and he got his start writing kaiju scripts with Varan, and it's not unrealistic to think that he wanted to bring that character back, but unfortunately it just was not in the budget.
No,
not at all.
No.
And it is worth noting.
Yeah, well,
go ahead.
Varan flying, Ghidorah flying,
too many flying monsters. Mogu probably flying.
Rodan flying, and then Mothra. Like that's too much.
Mothra, because remember, Mothra would have been the larval form, but even the larval form is often wire controlled. It was usually remote operated or a hand puppet, but for scenes of the puppet being blasted, it was attached to wires. What if it bit a monster's tail, like Mothra is oft one to do? It would have been an absolute nightmare, and Destroy All Monsters was crazy enough because you had Mothra flying away and Rodan flying and Varan in a couple of shots and King Ghidorah and Kumonga with all the leg. That was insane. That was bonkers, and they did not have the time or the money or the staff to pull that kind of thing off. So ultimately, even though both of these scripts had a lot of monsters and both of them did have the Godzilla Tower to some degree, and they had space alien invasion stuff, all this stuff, they had to pare it down. Mm-hmm. Neither of these scripts were going to cut it at the end of the day. They were too ambitious. They would make great screenplays to read through and probably very good books. And they would have made great movies if they'd had the time and the budget, but they just couldn't do it.
Oh, that's a good point. I'm amazed you flubbed like this, Danny. Mothra doesn't fly in Destroy All Monsters. She's still a worm.
I didn't flub. She is pulled up by wires in one scene as a worm.
Because when you said Mothra flies, even I was a little confused. Like, Mothra doesn't fly in that movie.
Well, she doesn't fly, but she goes flying.
No, there you go.
Remember when the gravity beams hit her and off she goes? Nice try, Jimmy.
I was going to say, you need to give him another $10 on top of the 100 for that.
Ooh, 110.
Because you just got schooled anyway. So, also, you mentioned the Godzilla Tower. The Godzilla, interestingly, in Sekizawa's draft, Anguirus fights the Godzilla Tower because apparently the Godzilla Tower could do a little bit more in that. Yeah,
Godzilla Tower was a little bit more ambitious in Sekizawa's version, which it would have been interesting to see it do more. It would have definitely been interesting to see it do more, but I like in the final film that it just kind of like there's something about it just sitting there and posing and not doing a lot.
I've got an entire thing about that.
Okay, we'll get there.
We talked about the context and what makes it interesting. I've got an entire thing where it's like it's like a power trip level of thematic discussion about what makes it interesting that Sekizawa ended up winning out on this, because here's a little preview for you. I think I have to give Cowlick credit for alerting me to this, and but I took it a little bit further, I think, than Cal initially did. This film, arguably, thanks to Sekizawa, because as has been established, in the many episodes where we've talked about Sekizawa, one of the things he loved was humor and satire. He was an incredibly good satirist. I think that this film has a weirdly postmodern meta commentary on Godzilla as a pop culture icon.
I would argue 100%. We will get into this when you do your thing, but I've always felt that way. I think this is the first Godzilla movie about Godzilla. You could say that All Monsters Attack qualifies as that because it's a little boy's dream, but it's not about the little boy. It's about the little boy. It's not about Godzilla. It's about the little boy.
Yeah, it's about the little boy. Also, the idea with that one, at least the most common interpretation, which is the one I share, which is that takes place in our world. It's not the Godzilla world. So the characters are all fictional, and this is a fanboy fantasizing about it. This is in universe.
Yes, so this is legitimately metatextual. I think that this is the first time that the Godzilla movies.
Yeah, and we had gotten 18 years in. Yeah, and we had gotten a hint of it with Hedorah because they had toys.
Yes,
in universe toys appearing.
But they didn't use the toys to comment on Godzilla's status as a pop culture icon and how it was changing, because that is another aspect, is the fact that Godzilla was so different now, 18 years and 12 movies in. Yeah. This is a very different character. And so we'll get into that later.
We will get into that. And this is purely a theory on our part, Danny. But you'll notice I said, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of ideas, and at least a lot of the tone and all of that, near as we can tell, from Kimura's script that still found its way into the movie, because Tanaka ended up going with Sekizawa to write the script for this, had him do another draft, obviously, to take things into, take budget and all that into consideration.
Yeah.
But Kimura never gets co-screenwriter credit, which you would have expected, because so much of his script still found its way into the movie. The other thing to take note is that Kimura basically stopped screenwriting after this. And the theory you and I have is that he might have gotten to a point in his life where he's like, you know what? I want to do this again. You know what? I will write that Godzilla movie. And then he not only doesn't get selected to write the script, he gets snubbed in the credits. And you and I think that was the last straw. And he's like, I'm done. I'm out.
It's very possible, because this was following on him already not being super crazy about writing in the genre. He got no real joy out of it, and which is remarkable when you consider the absolute masterpieces he turned in every once in a while. I mean, I love all the movies, but Tongo is a legitimate work of art. So in terms of that story and the script and the characters, it's just an astounding film. His opus, I would say, his magnum opus.
He said as much himself.
I agree. I completely agree. But then you get to Hedorah, and any contributions he tried to add to that thing mostly got yoinked out by Bono, who rewrote most of the story and script himself.
But they still had the courtesy to include him in the credits.
They did credit him. And as well they should have. But after 2 movies in a row where his contributions were overshadowed and or not credited for a series of scripts in a genre that he wasn't crazy about writing in the first place, at least not for several years at that point, ready to throw in the towel after that, and very likely did. Yeah, Mabuchi/Kimura was ready to not do this anymore after this. Now, again, I have no real proof of that, but it just feels like a good, it feels bad, because it's sad to see the guy not get snubbed like that, if that is indeed what happened. But it's not hard to believe that he was done after that, and you couldn't blame him if that was the case.
Yeah, I don't blame him, but it's still sad. I don't know if Kimura would have been all that fun to hang out with, but I do think that I do think he's a brilliant writer, And, I can respect him as a writer, and to get snubbed like that. I mean, this almost, to be honest, if our theory is true, this is the worst, I think, example of that. Like, he is completely snubbed. And then his cohort, whether he meant to do it maliciously or not, because I don't think Sekizawa meant to be malicious with this. That's not the kind of guy he was.
No, it was out of his hands.
So I think Kimura getting snubbed was purely a studio thing.
Very much so.
Kimura had made it no secret that he didn't like Toho. Maybe there was a little bit of animosity there. Who knows?
Maybe he was ready to go. He was ready to move on, and sadly, he didn't live much longer.
But yeah, about 10 more years, I think.
Yeah,
but he didn't really work, and it was a very sad end.
It was a whimper, not a bang kind of an exit from the franchise for somebody who had been so pivotal in, not just, not necessarily like Godzilla specifically, but the genre, right? His contributions strictly to Godzilla weren't like nearly on the level of Sekizawa, who did most of the writing during the Showa era. But we're talking about the guy who did Frankenstein Conquers the World and War of the Gargantuas and inexplicably King Kong Escapes. And yeah, you never guess. And obviously Matongo, which we clearly that's it for him.
Yeah, just be careful how many times you mention it. I'm just saying.
Oh, you're right. Never mind. You're right. We're moving on. We're not going there.
I don't.
No, wait a minute.
I don't need a phone call from my weirdest, biggest fan.
Just be careful.
Yeah. Anyway, we're moving on.
I'm still not convinced that he's not hiding in the bottom of your robot right now.
Jimmy, please tell me he's not. Okay, you do a security sweep at least once a week. Okay,
that's fair.
Okay, that's good.
Let's move on before we get a phone call.
Yeah, let's move on before we get a phone call. Anyway, so I should note that and this will be something that will have to be brought up, but again with the background here, this was released with a Hong Kong dub, which is weirdly iconic, at least for some people of a certain age who have seen it. Was for me because I grew up on this dub.
Oh yeah,
I have a hard time saying it's a bad dub, but it's not so much bad. It's not bad so much as it's weird, I would say.
It's an unusual
dub,
but
it's
a dub.
Yeah.
It's a
anyway,
dub.
It's a Hong Kong dub, so it has all the things you expect from a Hong Kong dub. The movie was released in 1977 by Cinema Shares. And apparently, if you had seen it in the cinema, which by the way, this was released after Megalon in the United States.
It was released because of Megalon, because Megalon was released in 76 and it was a hit. Like they had a hit. And so they were like, you got any more of these? And it's like, turns out there was a movie that had not gotten a Godzilla movie that had not been released. They just kind of skipped over Gigan. Now, Gigan did have a release in a Toho owned theater in Hawaii in 1976 before the wide Cinema Shares release. But in terms of where everybody else in the United States saw it, 1977.
But weirdly enough, they edited the thing apparently.
Oh,
they took out blood they took out blood and profanity, and I'm like, yeah, it's only in the dub. There's not nearly as much profanity if you watch it subtitled. And then here's the irony. This for me is one of the great ironies in the history of this movie. It was released, restored and uncut on VHS in 1988 because the edits were made to get it a G rating, because that happened a lot. This is not the last Godzilla movie to get butchered for a G rating.
It's true.
But here's the ironic thing. The studio who released the quote-unquote uncut version was New World.
Yes, our good friends at New World. Back again, because again, Godzilla 1985 ended up really, really helping that company out of a tough spot, and it sold like gangbusters on home video.
Yeah, by the way, this poor movie only sold 40,000 more tickets than Hedera. It
was enough of a bump up that they kept making more of them, But unfortunately, the idea of like recapturing the financial success of the Golden Age, I have to imagine Tanaka knew that was not feasible, because the movie going landscape, as we talked about already, was completely different. The film industry was in the process of the final throes of hemorrhaging. Like, it was already dead at this point.
Yeah.
And 1960s was insane. Like, that's still to this day not replicable. There will never be like another film era like that in Japan again, because it's just not replicable. They got as close as they could in terms of the actual content of the film that they could have done with the people and the time and the money they had, but it was not going to rake in the big bucks, and it was not going to get butts and seats, unfortunately.
No. And in case anyone's wondering, it sold in Japan 1.78 million tickets.
Yes, which is less than half of what these movies were raking in 10 years earlier.
It would only get lower as the 70s went on.
Eventually,
not an indication of quality.
No, it's just an indication of industry, economy, culture, and honest to God, burnout, lack of interest. Just like we're done with this.
We're in a golden age right now.
Yeah, we're getting. I mean, at this point, back in the jumping back to the 70s, we're not too far away from the movies earning getting less than $1 million in attendance. Like, it's going to be a problem.
That was Terror made less than $1 million. There was a bump with Mechagodzilla because it was 20th anniversary, and robots. Robots were popular, and they brought back Harada, and so it got a bump for that.
But Gigan didn't have any of that. They had just think about it for a second. Like, here's what they had. They had very little money. They had very little time. They had Nakano and his big explosions, thank goodness. They had Fukuda, thank goodness. They had a capable, if not recognizable, cast. Awesome. They had a great story and a script from the best person to write for the Godzilla franchise in the Showa era, the definitive voice of the Showa era. If you can't get Honda on your film, at least get Sekizawa. They had Nakajima. They had a memorable cast of returning monsters. They had a great marquee new monster, and that's it. They had to scrounge for literally everything else. They had to scrounge for the special effects footage. A significant portion of the special effects footage had to be gleaned from, destroy.
I've got a list. I've got a list.
We got a list, do you? Now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Toho. Thank you, Toho Kingdom. At least I think that's where I got this. I'm pretty sure I got this from Toho Kingdom. I found other lists from other sources, but it was not as exhaustive as this. By the way, 89-minute movie. Guess how much of it is stock footage?
87
Here's a hint.
minutes.
Not as much as you think.
It's true. It's not nearly as much. And what is there, I would argue, is integrated about as well as you could.
I was going to say, the stock footage is massaged in very nicely. So as much as we rag on it, it's still used pretty effectively. Now, the day for night filter doesn't always work.
That's not great. The day for night filter it makes the darks that were already dark too dark, and it makes the lights that were dark weirdly dark and unnatural. Yeah, it doesn't quite.
However,
work.
It's still not nearly as bad as the Crater Lake monster.
Oh, the Crater Lake monsters,
because at least they put the filter on anyway.
yeah, that's a whole can of worms.
I'll probably cover it at some point. But anyway, 89-minute movie, 7 minutes of it is stock footage.
Yeah,
7.
Honestly, that ain't bad. That ain't bad. There's
a lot of monster footage in this. This has
a
fair amount of monster footage in this.
And that was another studio thing. That was Nakano, who was basically said, hey, we're making this for kids. This is a children's matinee kiddie champion festival movie.
Excuse me. The list I'm looking at right now was where they got the stock music, which we'll talk about that. But
we got to do that too.
But the clips. Sorry, finish what you were saying, and then I'll bring up.
The whole thing with the stock footage is not the stock footage, the monsters, is that this is made for a children's matinee thing. Make sure the monster footage is sprinkled in at regular intervals so that the kids don't get bored. That's what Nakano was told to do, and that's what Fukuda was told to do. And so they ran with that. And I would say that the distribution is pretty decent. And honestly, we wouldn't see clearly Megalon also does this. I feel like half of Megalon is monster fight. It's not, but it feels like half of Megalon is that last monster fight. And the idea of like the big tag team epic monster fight was really like, when I think of movies like that, I think of this one. I think of Megalon. I think of Space Godzilla, actually. It has a very similar kind of big, epic, very long tag team fight at the end, except it's 2 against 1, or sometimes 3 when Mogera splits. And then maybe just a handful of other ones where it feels like the last third of the movie is like this big, epic thing. And Gigan's is extensive, and we spend a lot of time just on the monsters in this film. We just chill with them. They're full-fledged characters at this point, so there's, we're, as children, we're watching, I know what you're about to say. We're watching, Godzilla bend over and make sure Anguirus is fine after he gets hurt, and like a lot of stuff. Like,
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because we have to reenact it.
oh God, do we?
The most infamous part from the dub. We have to reenact it.
Okay, well,
not now necessarily, but when the time comes, because
that'll give me time to clench. That's fine.
Yeah. But anyway, the stock footage. I wanted to make sure I had the full list, so I did go to Toho Kingdom just to be safe because they're very good about that. But we have stock footage from 12 movies. Some are just quick clips. I think at least a quarter of them are just in a montage, and then the rest of them are used for, massaged in with the special effects. But Rodan, the Mysterians, which is really only a couple of shots.
And those movies weren't even filmed in the same aspect ratio.
I know. The last war, which again it's a couple of shots in the destruction sequences. It's one of the crowd evacuation scenes from Mothra vs. Godzilla. Get a lot of Ghidorah the three-headed monster, a lot of Invasion of Astro Monster or Monster Zero, a little bit of Ebra Horror of the Deep or Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. The other one that I would say gets used a lot, infamously I might add, is War of the Gargantuas.
Crawling behind the trees.
Which I will say, because I saw this movie multiple times well before I ever saw War of the Gargantuas. And I gotta say, you can't immediately tell that is not Gigan.
No, you gotta really, really look. And they picked they trimmed it at just the right spot. And like I said, result of circumstance. Megalon, victim of circumstance. You can't do the same trick twice like that, man. That's one of the core tenets of Miyamoto Musashi, is like, you can pull the trick a couple times, but you can't do it after that, or everybody's going to know what you're going to do. You got to shake it up.
Yeah. And keep in mind, this was made at a time when stock footage wasn't nearly as egregious, because you went and saw a movie at a theater, and that was it. You might get lucky and see it on TV.
Yeah,
nobody was like watching these on demand and popping in their Blu-rays and pausing it and and going through it all with a fine-tooth comb.
Yeah, that didn't exist. Time. It was a different time, and honest to God, we're talking 10 years since some of these movies had come out, even longer if we're talking about something like Rodan. That's enough for a generation and a half to grow up, and maybe kids who watched Gigan had never seen Rodan. So for me, a lot of the footage in Gigan I was seeing for the first time in Gigan. I hadn't seen The Last War. Like, I hadn't seen the Mysterians yet. I hadn't seen Rodan yet. Like, a lot of that stuff. I hadn't seen Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster yet when I saw Gigan. So I could tell that things didn't match.
I know several people, including Jacob Lingle of Kaiju United, for whom this was their first Godzilla movie.
Yeah, this was one that played. Like, I first saw this movie when I was, maybe 8 years old, 7, 8, 9 years old, on a Sci-Fi Channel all-day Labor Day Sofathon. It's the same one where I saw Mechagodzilla and Hedorah.
Which, fun fact, the Sci-Fi Channel broadcast was the first one to have the voice bubbles.
That is true. The one I have did not have the voice bubbles. It was a little old for that. So I did not see the voice bubbles until years later on a perfectly legal copy of the movie. Something stuck in my throat there. But it was like, I saw it there. It was.
Were they words that got stuck in your throat?
Oh, God. Jimmy. No, Jimmy. Oh, thank you. The moment of betrayal I felt there.
Anyway.
You shrug your shoulders all you want, Marchand. You earned the wet trombone. I'm sorry.
The wet trombone. That's what we're calling
Soggy
it.
trombone.
Soggy. Anyway, we're moving on before this degenerates.
I don't see
but you
how
were
it
saying,
could.
you saw it and early on.
Yeah, I saw it early on. It was within the first 10 Godzilla movies I'd ever seen. I want to say it was probably, I'm not going to sit here and fully recollect what number it was, but it was early on. And I was blissfully unaware at the time of how much stock footage was in it. And it probably wasn't that dissimilar from the 8 or 9-year-olds who saw it in 1972.
Probably.
Or the 7 or 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds in America who saw it in 1977.
For sure.
They probably, like, aside from maybe watching a couple reels on Super 8mm at home, you couldn't rewatch a lot of this stuff at the time. You had to luck out and find it on television, or you had to find a revival theater that was playing old cuts of the movies. So a lot of this was new. And so the idea of stock footage actually worked far better than people now in the rewind it, pause it age of media digestion give it credit for. Mm-hmm. Now it sticks out like a sore thumb because we've seen the movies a million times. We've seen them on TV. We have the discs. People stream them, and you can tell that stuff. I mean, you just pulled up a list, like that list that's on.
I didn't even finish it. There's 4 more movies I need to mention.
That list would not have existed like that thoroughly in 1972. I mean, it would have been in a fanzine probably, but like nobody would have, like, it would have been very hard to actually catalog all that stuff. What are the other movies?
Yeah.
I mean, I know what they are.
Well, yeah. But Son of Godzilla and Destroyer of Monsters, which are shown in a montage, which I don't mind those when they're just like, oh, there's all these other, there's all the monsters on Monster Island. It's the aliens talking. And so it's like, okay, fine. Show us a montage of the of the monsters doing monster things. Sure. I can work with that. It's totally fine. It's common practice, really, honestly. And then apparently there's a clip from All Monsters Attack somewhere. It's probably when the aliens are talking about the Nebulans is what I usually see them called. Unless you want to rattle off the full ridiculous name of Nebula M Space Hunter aliens or whatever. But it's probably during that when they're talking about what happened to their planet. And interestingly, there is a clip from Hedorah.
Dead fish.
Yep.
That one is one of the more like iffy ones just because the movie was less than a year old at the time. Like Hedorah was less than a year old. So that one's pushing it a little bit, but it works so great. And it honestly almost, if you think about it, this is a little esoteric, but it almost allows All Monsters Attack, Hedorah, and Gigan to almost exist as like a weird trilogy about humans destroying the environment.
Yeah.
If you think about it, because in All Monsters Attack, all the problems are caused by like the parents not being there, and you see the destruction in the smoggy air, and then obviously Hedorah is Hedorah, and then in this one we see that an entire planet of humanoids destroyed themselves with that exact crap. And the cockroaches took over after that, but the planet was already ruined, so they're coming here.
Yeah,
so
their planet is dying, so they need a new place to live. Which, let me. I know this is a little bit tangential, but at some point we need to spend a little more time talking about the movie itself.
We do.
I want to throw this question at you: do you think that makes our alien villains at least a little sympathetic?
I think so. I think that there's an element of sympathy, if not sympathy, then at least empathy that runs through some of the Toho baddies, like Namikawa existing,
that's a little different. She's an exception.
Different. She's an exception, but it does allow you to think that, well, maybe not all the planet Exilians are evil.
Jimmy's well acquainted
Jimmy
with that.
Knows.
He's getting married to one.
Yeah, he is. He definitely is. By the way, Jimmy, I haven't actually congratulated you in person. We've talked, but now that I'm here, congratulations, man. I'm happy for you. That's good to hear. I'm glad you're happy, man. That's off topic.
I was going to say, but I can assure you, I've been seeing them going over their guest lists and all that, and you are definitely on the list.
Oh, that's exciting. Thank you, Jimmy. I appreciate you.
Yeah. In fact, I campaigned to have all of the past guests on the show invited to the wedding.
He's actually going to be okay with John coming?
John? Oh, no,
Jimmy?
they've buried the hatchet. Their things are
okay. That's good. That's good. So, okay, ever so briefly, the Exilians are cold, hard machines, but Namikawa has a heart, and so there's the idea that like maybe not all the Exilians are necessarily built evil. The Mysterians, I would argue, are very like they're cruel, but at the end, when you see their burnt faces and their broken bodies as the result of nuclear devastation, you think to yourself, they're not so dissimilar from what we might end up doing. So there is an element of recognition and a little empathy there. The Kilax, not so much.
The Disco Space Nuns are pure evil. And I don't just say that as somebody who works on Monster Island.
That's true.
So
that's true. So here we go. Big brother's watching. Big sister.
Yeah.
But
so what makes the Nebulans interesting for me is they didn't even cause the problem. Now, with the Mysterians, you can argue they brought this on themselves.
Yes, they are the arbiters of their own destruction.
The Zillions, maybe, the one we sympathize with the most, besides Jimmy's fiance, is Namikawa, and it was because she's an exception. She sees through what they're doing. She's breaking away. These guys didn't ask for this problem. They said, we inherited the problem. The humanoids wrecked everything and left us with a dying planet. We got their technology. That was cool, but we need a new place to live.
This is also very, very interesting to talk about in context of the film itself, because what better way is there to describe the culture, the global culture of the 60s and 70s than all y'all old people are messing up with war and disease and pollution, and us kids have to inherit the problem, right? That is a very 60s and 70s thing.
I think us millennials feel that with the boomers.
Every generation does that. Every generation has a conflict, whether it's deserved or overblown or somewhere in the middle or a mix of both, of the last generation screwed up and we have to clean up the mess. And then we're going to end up doing it to our kids too. It's just how it works, unfortunately. But there's always that hope that we can break the cycle, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at Japan in the late 60s and early 70s, one thing that the Godzilla movies don't necessarily always address very directly, but there's a through line of it that runs kind of subtly through some of the movies, especially in Hedera, are the many student protests that were happening at the time in the country.
I've talked about that in some past episodes.
Yes, and so I won't retread a lot of ground here, but in the late 60s and early 70s, the clash between the younger generation, especially the college kids, and authority figures and the people that they felt were ruining their lives and ruining the country and ruining all that stuff, that bleeds into the pop culture. And I'm not saying that's necessarily specifically what's being reflected here, but I'd be shocked if there wasn't a little DNA in there of the idea that the relatively innocent bystanders, these bugs, literally the bugs that
bugs.
Resilient, yes, that's a key thing. Like, they might be bugs, they might be small, but they're resilient, right? And they're not going to go down without a fight. They're not going to go down easily. They can survive what the ruling class of their planet has thrown at them. And when they ultimately kill themselves off, the bugs rise up, but they're left with a mess, and ultimately it's a mess that they determine they cannot clean, and so they invade.
There are
layers there.
I was going to say, I think that's one of the more interesting motivations for an invasion in these movies.
Mm-hmm.
It's not talked about nearly so much, because we get an entire scene and sequence where there's this, I would say, fascinating exposition dump where they explain they monologue about what they're doing. You barely get hints of it in the Mechagodzilla movies, because they just kind of offhand mention, it's like, yeah, our planet's going to fall into a black hole. We need a new place to live. And, they just leave it at that. And that's in the second movie. In the first movie, they're just evil and want to take over.
Basically.
If the Keloks say nothing, the Zillions, they need a specific resource. They need water.
They need water, and then the Mysterians need a planet to live on, and they need to rebuild their race.
Yeah.
Mars needs moms.
It's Mars needs moms. Yeah, but way before that. Hopefully Venus doesn't need moms, or else someone's got a PTSD really hard.
Why you got to do that to Jimbo, man?
He's fine. Look at him. He's like he's only twitching a little bit. You know.
He's actually fine. That was a twitch. That was a big twitch.
Okay,
that was a big twitch.
Yeah,
okay, sorry, Jimmy.
But this one is so interesting because, again, you can look at the other ones, in the simians. That's what I usually see them called. They're later, but if you look at who came before, it's really interesting to see. You know, okay, we need a resource. Theoretically, it's our own fault. We don't have this resource. We don't have water. But these guys are arguably victims. And they're just doing what they think they have to do to survive. It's really interesting if you stop and think about it. I think it's reductionist to just pass them off as just being evil invaders. I think there's more going on there.
There's something more complex here. And I think that actually does, because again, surface level, you can look at this movie and go, oh, this is the one with the bugs that wear people. Like that.
You need to help me with that one, because I have seen multiple translations of how they explain things.
I have too. So the dub very heavily indicates that the bugs are wearing people suits.
They're grave robbers, like
Edgar Bug in Men in Black. They're just inside of humans. And then if you look at some of the translations out there and you listen to some of the dialogue and do a little research, you will see that they're referencing like basically photocopying humans in a way. Like they're preserving the after image of corpses,
right?
And they're reflecting it around themselves like a hologram almost.
Right. You can see through it. They look like 6 foot tall cockroaches. And, you know, as opposed to their human guises. The dub used the term receptacle. Which is kind of, I will admit, that's a really interesting idea, because it does feel like it's in keeping with the whole cockroach thing, where they're digging up corpses and using the corpses as puppets, basically.
I remember like the dub said, we're going to use you as uniforms.
Yes, which is
terrifying.
Weird, which is so creepy.
Terrifying.
Which is really creepy, but the subtitles generally give more like, you know, like their projections. I think that's what it said in Criterion, because the Criterion subs are different than what was on the Sony DVD, or even I think even they're also different from the Kraken release, if I remember correctly. I didn't have the Kraken release, so I don't know.
Yes, there are definitely differences, and it's gotten so kind of convoluted.
Funny enough, there is a chart I found a link to on Wikizilla that takes you to a spreadsheet that compares every single line in every single release of this movie, dub and the different subtitles, so you can compare and contrast.
That's the kind of esoteric minutia that I eat like Tic Tacs, man. Like I'd sit and read that all day. I have sat and read that all day.
Yeah, because the ridiculous profanity that got me into a little bit of trouble growing up watching this movie, because my mother would be like, why are they talking like that? I was like, I don't know. That's a product of the dub, because apparently these Hong Kong guys think like, oh, Americans love hearing profanity.
They got potty mouths.
Anyway, after images, projection.
After images, but even then, some of the Japanese sources that I've read have used the skin suit thing. So I feel like it's just so convoluted and like homogenized now in terms of both versions, that the original, I want to say the original intent was that it was some kind of a, like, you know, projected disguise. But at this point, you could probably say skin suit to a Japanese fan and they'd say, oh yeah, sure. So maybe it's probably, I would say both explanations technically work, and both of them are unsettling in different ways. One of them works a little better with the plot because of the shadow scene. That doesn't make a lot of sense if they're just bodies, but the idea of the roaches living in people is unsettling and adds a really macabre layer.
It does. So and I do think that hurts them in terms of sympathy if they're if they're desecrating bodies. But I don't know, even if it's just after images, you have to ask yourself, how did they get them?
Really big Polaroid cameras from space.
From space. Are there giant, are there big Polaroid cameras in space, Jimmy? Fine, don't talk about it. Anyway.
What were we expecting?
Yeah, what were we expecting? So I don't know. I just find that fascinating about our villains here, but there's so much Fascinating stuff to talk about this movie. We need to move on. To be continued.